Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.
With our new approach to promoting meaningful participation and preparing our students and young people for employability in the future, socialisation is one of the key factors. And I'd just like to ask Karen, for service providers, why is socialisation and developing social skills so important that we are a part of that?
Social skills are everything in terms of life success, because you can spend hundreds of hours of your time and the client's time working on hard skills. But if they don't have those soft skills, they're not going to go to work, they're not going to be participating in any kind of meaningful way in life activities. Because to participate meaningfully in life activities, you have to be engaged with other people. Other people have to want to be with you, like you, and feel as if you are part of the group or the team. The underlying skills that are required for success in life are soft skills, these social skills, learning how to get along with other people, learning how to work cooperatively, being a part of the team. You have to carry on conversations with other people, and those other people have to see you as someone that they want to be with, to communicate with, to do things with in life. Keeping a job is actually about applying those soft skills, knowing how to socialize, how to communicate effectively with other people, how to build relationships. That's the soft skills or social skills that I want you to be thinking about and teaching your clients, as well as those hard skills.
And Karen, you talk about incidental learning through vision. What is some of the social learning that our children that are blind or have low vision miss out on?
Well, I think the most critical things that our students or clients who are blind or visually impaired are missing out on in the social milieu are those non-verbalized cues in communication. They miss the facial expressions, they miss the body language, they miss the gestures. Those are huge hints that sighted people use to figure out what's really going on. You'll hear service providers say things like, he's quite wooden, he's flat, he has this flat affect. That's because he hasn't had that incidental learning that teaches us as sighted people how to move, how to gesture, how to smile.
So if a service provider noticed that in a child that they had a flat affect, how do you think that they could support that child?
So if I see someone who is giving me no feedback whatsoever facially or with body language, I'm going to start giving them cues. So as a service provider, I might say to a child, if you're happy, if you're pleased, if you like what's going on, I need to see you smile. If you are sad and you're smiling, it's going to confuse me as a sighted person, because they don't realize that we sighted people are looking all the time at what that expression on the face is. I like to practice with kids. I like to see a little bit of a smile, just a casual kind of smile. Now I'd like to see a bigger smile. Now I'd like to see a grin. What's the difference between a grin and a smile? We need to teach kids gestures. And you've got to teach it explicitly, in a structured way, consistently over time. And as kids learn a skill and you see that they are applying it, move on to the next skill. Move on to it may be handshaking, it may be, learning some new gestures. Oh, I give up, throwing up your hands with palms forward, or oh, I'm so stressed about this, gluing your hand to your forehead. Incidental learning is about learning that happens casually because you're observing in the environment, and social skills are predominantly learned through this casual observation by sighted people. So when we're working with kids who are blind or have low vision, we have to be mindful of the fact that they need some verbal cues occasionally as to what we're doing socially.
It's even about, in those early years, starting to talk more about feelings, but often with those younger kids, they're not seeing our expressions, they're not relating to feelings so much. So if we're not labeling it and we're not talking about feelings, they're not going to relate to gestures, right? Gestures will be meaningless for them.
But with children, especially young children, toddlers, preschoolers, we really have an obligation, I think, as adults to try to help them label what they're feeling. Just as you're speaking now, it's reminding me of the importance of labeling feelings for all children. But for those children who are blind or visually impaired, we really have to make that explicit and clear and articulate it, because they don't even have the cue of how we look. So if you don't have that cue, someone's got to tell you, this is how I'm feeling. Unless you tell me, I don't know. And then I think it's really important to give children feedback. So if I'm the service provider and I'm working with a toddler who is looking kind of glum or unhappy, I need to say, wow, I'm concerned because you look a little sad, or you look a little anxious, or you look are you okay? Is everything okay? Are you happy? Is everything okay? So that the child understands that that facial expression or that body language that they're using is making me as an adult think that they are feeling in a certain way, and to label those feelings. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think it helps them to get sort of outside of just themselves, right? Because that's the other thing that we kind of see sometimes as kids are getting older, that they can relate to themselves but not to others as much, right?
And I think we help them build those empathetic skills, because I think that one of the other things that happens with blind kids is that they don't get that kind of feedback from others around them, particularly when they're little, because people assume that it's just because they're blind that they took the toy and ran. And they don't understand that the consequence is that they may then develop an attitude of, I'm more important, I'm the one who's really central in all of this, and I don't care about those other kids. And that's where we see that breakdown in empathy, is when we let kids do things that are not socially acceptable and we don't give them any feedback.
So we're sort of making excuses for people,
Yeah.
for the children, based on their blindness or low vision.
Exactly. And that then gives that child the wrong message, that other kid's not as important, or it doesn't matter what other people feel. It only matters what I feel. It takes away that otherness that you need to be a truly social person, to empathize with others, to be connected to others. And that's why we see some of the selfish behavior or the egocentric behaviors that we sometimes see. It's because they didn't get that feedback about how it made that other person feel.
Because when I'm working with young people, so teenagers, and particularly those who are transitioning into high school, if they have missed those social rules, then that's when it's really important, when you're a teenager and you're part of the group and you're wanting to be with everybody else, but you've got no clue that you're breaking all the social rules left, right and centre, and you don't understand why you can't make friends or can't keep friends. And that's really heartbreaking for everybody, service providers included. If we suddenly expect them to do that when they're 12 or they're 13, but they've never been taught how to do it, it's really unfair to expect them to just have that skill where no one has ever expected them to do that.
And I think it's important, Nat, to understand that in the developmental process, all children start out egocentric. It's not just blind and low vision children, it's all children. We need to start giving blind and visually impaired children feedback earlier than we even would consider giving that kind of feedback to fully sighted kids, because those fully sighted kids are grabbing that information from the environment. They will learn naturally, casually through the environment what they can get away with and what they can't. Whereas these blind and low vision kids are in a situation where they are not getting adequate feedback.
But it's important that I have that conversation with the parents, that when I'm doing a session with your child or your young person, we're talking about social skills, that I am going to be pulling your child up on a few of these different things, and I am going to be commenting about this. So I'm just making you aware that I'm not meaning to sound harsh at all. I'm giving that feedback. So when you sit there and you have your head down and you're fiddling with stuff all over the place, you're telling me that you're not listening to me. And they say to me, I am listening. I said, yes, but your body language is telling me you're not listening to me, and I am programmed to always believe what I'm seeing from body language than what you're telling me with your voice. And we get into some serious arguments sometimes about how unfair that is, but I have to say that's just how it works. That's what the world is like.
So as service providers, we do have to talk about things that aren't comfortable and have those difficult conversations, sometimes even with the parents on some of those things that they may be allowing their child to do, but we know in the long run is going to end up causing some social situations or reducing their ability to make friends and things like that. So yeah, it's tricky.
And how do you think we should intervene with a young child then who might be flapping or jumping up and down when they're excited, when it may not be an appropriate thing to do?
Those mannerisms that we see so often, we have to understand that we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to teach the children with whom we are working what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And we need to give parents, as Nat and Laura were just talking about, kind of a heads up that sometimes we're not going to be nice. We are trying to be honest with kids and with the parents about what the expectations are of the general society. These mannerisms are tricky. Sometimes these mannerisms are an outgrowth or occur as an outgrowth of missed cues, but they also sometimes occur because kids have missed opportunities in terms of sensory stimulus and sensory integration. We may understand the why kids are rocking, or why kids are flapping, or why kids are eye pressing. We understand what the issues are behind those behaviors. We need to explain that to parents, and we need to explain it to the best of our ability and to the child's level of understanding by age, what's going on there that's causing that. Some of that, particularly the flapping, the rocking, the twirling, those kind of behavioral mannerisms are occurring because there's not enough movement. The child is not moving enough. We have to tell parents, your children, because they can't see, doesn't mean they don't need to move. They really do need to move. And if you have a child who's rocking, who's spinning, that child actually may need to go out into the yard and run and jump and swing. And if you can catch the kids at the moment when they start to make that kind of mannerism happening, especially with the little ones, redirect that energy out into a more appropriate kind of environmental, movement-oriented activity. If the child has gotten to be a young adult and you're still having difficulties with these mannerisms, if the child has the intellectual ability to process it, you need to have a sit-down discussion with the youngster about where you can do this and where you can't do this. Public, private, private, public. Help them sort out where you're allowed to do these kinds of things that are seen as abnormal and where you're not allowed to do them. It matters what you do in front of other people because they will be judging you based on that behavior. if it's physically damaging to the child. Think eye gouging, eye poking, eye pressing. Some of these behaviors that we see because children without vision or with very severely impaired vision are triggering a reaction with the optical nerve that flashes, gives a neurological flash. It simulates vision in a sense. It simulates stimulates brain activity, and we think that what they are doing is really sparking. It's sparking the brain. That's what we think. They can't do it. It's just not okay because they are damaging the eyeball and they are damaging the bone structure of their faces. And we have to put a stop to it. We cannot let them do that. The consequences are not just social, but medically damaging, physically damaging to the child. If I have an older child who's still doing something like this, I will have a conversation with them about the fact that they are damaging their face, damaging their bone structure, possibly damaging their eyes beyond repair. Parents need to know from us what's going on and what to do about the what's going on to get to where you want to be, where they want their child to be. So if you can work with parents to help them understand what's causing the behavior and then what the alternatives are for resolving that kind of a behavior, you're in a perfect place.
So Karen, as we're talking through all of these topics about socialization and skill acquisition that we might be teaching kids or young people for school, for making friends, what are your thoughts on how we can support kids? Like, what are the skills or the questions or the being a friend bit or starting a friendship bit when they're, particularly if they've transitioned into like a protective primary school area and then they're in the big wide world of high school?
I would always ask you to start with children by asking, who do you know? What are you doing? What's going on around you? Do you know who's at school? What are the names of the students in your school? What are the names of the students in your class? Who sits next to you in the classroom? Who sits behind you in the classroom? Who sits in front of you? What are their names? What do they do? And if the kid says to me, I don't know, then my next thing to say to the youngster is, how can you find out? You have a need to know. You tell me that you want to have friends, but the way we lay down that foundation for having friends is to pay attention to who's out there, who's of interest to us, and then we can start building bridges to whomever is of interest to us, but we have to know who they are and what their interests are. So let's talk about who's in your class, what are they doing, how can you find out what they're doing? Young people with vision impairment need to understand the world is not going to come to you. Service providers have to help youngsters recognize that sighted kids are not going to come to them in the same way that teachers come to them, parents come to them, therapists come to them. It doesn't work that way. It works a whole different way with same-aged peers. They must initiate. They must reach out, ask the right questions, and then people will respond to you. I often will try to do small group kinds of activities where I'll have maybe 5 or 6 sighted kids with 1 or 2 blind or visually impaired kids, and I'll assign them into dyads, for example, and I'll just say to them, I'm going to give you all a topic to discuss, and I want you to talk for 2 minutes, and I'm going to time you. And at the end of 2 minutes, I want you to chat about what you learned about that other person, what you want to know still about that other person, how you thought that person felt, what the cues were.
In the age that we are in now, the biggest part of so many people's lives is technology. And so much of our lives is now online. And I guess that's something that I'm always thinking about when I'm working with children, and particularly teenagers, around their online presence. and their understanding of what it means to be online and participating in online activities and social media, and that is going to be a part of life, but they also have to be following the same rules about maintaining their safety and not being vulnerable, but we don't want them to be excluded from that situation. That's such a big thing online for so many different reasons.
Yeah, I think, Nat, that it's a big deal for children with and without vision, because I think a lot of young people in this 21st century where we are now really think that they have hundreds and hundreds of friends because they have hundreds and hundreds of friend contacts within Facebook or in social media milieu. And they have to understand that that is not a friendship that will last forever, or a friendship that you can rely on in terms of networking for jobs, networking for partnerships. And what we have to convey to children, and teenagers in particular, is that there's a difference between an online presence, an online friendship, and a real life connection with a human being, a real person, someone who's in front of you, who's walking with you, talking with you, doing things with you. At some point, if they really want to get to know that person, if they really think they might want to date that person, if they think that person is a possibility in terms of work roles, they're going to have to meet face to face. They're going to have to sit and carry on a conversation in real time, person to person. Online presence is only going to work for you to a certain point. It's great for what I would call superficial or surface level relationships. Children who have no vision or limited vision have to understand that there are various and sundry relationships out there in the world that we formulate with other people. And they come from the outside, which is all of the public, all of those people out there, strangers. We don't really know those people. We don't know their names. We need to communicate with them, but we don't give away any personal information. The next layer in terms of relationships is acquaintances. Here I know a little bit more about you. I maybe know your first name. I might know kind of sort of where you're from, like if you're from America or from Australia or from New, but I don't know your street address. I just kind of sort of know you from school or from work or from the internet. Kids need to understand public, acquaintances, friends, and we speak of different things, we communicate at different levels. There are hundreds of thousands of people in public. There are hundreds of people in the acquaintance ring, and then there are some people in that friendship ring. Most of us have, maybe 10, 12 really close friends, maybe 20, 25 friends, but we don't have hundreds of friends. It's too much. We can't keep up with all those people. Social media friends are really acquaintances. The next layer in, which is very few people, 2, 3, 4 maybe, 5 if you have a really big swatch of intimates or family type closeness with certain people. Intimates are meant to be very few people. And then there's this T9C core, which is private self. And I think as service providers, we need to help kids understand you don't have to tell anyone everything. You can keep certain things secret. That's the challenge with online, is to help kids understand, all kids, not just kids who are blind or have vision loss. All kids need to understand we have levels of relating, and those levels are dictated by how well we know the person and how well the person knows us, and what kinds of things we can talk about and do with them.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.